Most people think the atomic bombs only killed people instantly, like some flash of light, and then nothing. But that's completely wrong. What happened in the minutes, days, and decades after the blast was actually worse. Radiation didn't just kill, it erased identities, destroyed families, and burned people alive from the inside. And what if I told you the most haunting part wasn't even shown to the world until decades later? For nearly 80 years, we've remembered Hiroshima and Nagasaki as necessary to end World War II. But today, we're going to uncover the aftermath you were never taught in school. Chapter 1. First Nuclear Bomb. It was a quiet Monday morning in Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. The skies were painfully blue. Kids were walking to school. Workers packed into trams. Farmers headed to their fields. There were no sirens, no warnings, just the hum of an ordinary day. And then, at exactly 8:15 a.m., everything changed in a flash. A US B-29 bomber called Enola Gay dropped a 9,700-pound bomb named Little Boy. It didn't even touch the ground. It exploded 1,968 feet above the city. In 1/1,000,000th of a second, the temperature at the blast center reached over 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. People directly beneath the explosion simply vanished. Some left nothing behind, but shadows burned into concrete walls. The shockwave flattened everything within a 1-mile radius. Wooden houses burst into flames instantly. Over 70,000 people died that same morning. By the end of the year, the toll rose to over 140,000 from burns, injuries, and something far more sinister: radiation. A mushroom cloud rose more than 45,000 feet into the air, higher than Mount Everest, and was visible for hundreds of miles. And the worst part? Most people didn't even know what a nuclear bomb was. Hiroshima wasn't just destroyed, it was erased in under 10 seconds. And just 3 days later, the same fate would unfold in Nagasaki. Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video so far. Chapter 2. Nagasaki Bombing. 3 days after Hiroshima vanished on August 9, 1945, the nightmare repeated itself, this time in Nagasaki. The target was originally Kokura, but cloud cover saved that city. So the B-29 bomber Boxcar switched course and dropped the second atomic bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, over Nagasaki at exactly 11:02 a.m. Unlike Hiroshima's uranium-based bomb, this one used plutonium. More powerful, more chaotic. It exploded about 1,650 feet above the city, and in a flash, 40,000 people were gone. Vaporized, just like that. The blast was equivalent to 21 kilotons of TNT. Hills somewhat cushioned the explosion, sparing parts of the city, but the devastation was still unimaginable. Concrete buildings collapsed. Wooden ones burst into flames. The heat was so intense that people left shadows burned into staircases, bridges, and even sidewalks. One man's silhouette was permanently scorched into a wall as he sat waiting for a streetcar that never came. By the end of 1945, the death toll had doubled to over 74,000, and the survivors weren't exactly lucky. Many suffered from flash burns, blindness, and long-term radiation effects. Rare footage shows twisted steel, melted statues, and crowds of silent, dazed survivors walking through a city that looked like a graveyard of ash. Nagasaki wasn't just bombed, it was scarred. Forever. Chapter 3. Survivors? For those who survived the initial blast, if you can even call it survival, the next few hours were hell. The kind of nightmare that makes even horror movies look tame. These survivors would later be called hibakusha, which means explosion-affected people. Many of them stumbled through the ruins, naked or barely clothed, because the blast had literally burned the clothes off their backs. Skin hung in ribbons from their arms. Eyes were swollen shut or burned out completely. Some people didn't look injured at all until they collapsed minutes later, or hours, or days. Radiation doesn't play fair. The hospitals? Gone. Doctors and nurses, either dead or dealing with hundreds of patients using whatever they could scavenge, scraps of cloth, bits of wood. One doctor in Hiroshima treated over 10,000 people in the first few days. With no proper equipment, no understanding of radiation, and no idea why people who looked fine were suddenly bleeding from their gums and vomiting black. Some patients hallucinated, others screamed until their voices gave out. Many begged their rescuers to kill them and end their pain. Fires raged across the cities. Wooden homes burned for hours. And if the flames didn't get you, the sky might. A strange, oily black rain started falling. It was radioactive, full of soot, ash, and fallout. Survivors drank it out of desperation. There was no water, but every drop was toxic. One eyewitness described seeing a mother carrying her child's charred body, still warm. Another saw people lined up on a bridge, so dehydrated they had jumped into the river to cool off, and drowned. The temperature near the blast center was over 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Glass melted, roof tiles bubbled, people's internal organs literally cooked. Within the first 24 hours, over 100,000 people were either dead or dying. But the bombs didn't stop killing when they exploded. The real horror, the invisible killer called radiation, was just getting started. And no one had any idea what they were really dealing with. In the days after the bombing, something eerie began to happen. People who had walked away from the blast seemingly unharmed suddenly started collapsing. Their hair fell out in clumps, high fevers struck, gums bled, skin turned purple, then black. Internal organs just stopped working. Doctors were baffled. What was this silent poison? They had no word for it yet, but today we know it as acute radiation syndrome, ARS. Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, a Hiroshima hospital director, wrote about patients coughing blood, children covered in strange spots, and mothers cradling lifeless babies, their own skin peeling off. There were no cures, no understanding, just suffering. Radiation didn't explode loudly. It whispered death over days, weeks, even years, and scarred generations of people. Chapter 4. Decades of Scars. For the hibakusha, the years that followed were filled with pain that didn't always show on the outside. Some had keloid scars, thick, raised patches of skin that twisted their faces and bodies, earning cruel nicknames like monsters from the unscarred. Many couldn't find work. Others couldn't find love. Employers feared they were too sick. Families didn't want their children marrying someone who might pass down invisible damage. The fear wasn't just physical, it was social, and it ran deep. Some survivors developed cancer, leukemia, or other illnesses decades later. One girl, Sadako Sasaki, was only 2 years old when the bomb fell. A decade later, she was diagnosed with leukemia. While in the hospital, she folded paper cranes, 1,000 of them, because legend said it would grant her a wish. She died before finishing, and her story became a global symbol of peace and heartbreaking hope. There were around 650,000 hibakusha over time, and many lived in silence. Some felt survivors' guilt. Others lived with chronic pain. All of them carried invisible scars on their bodies, in their hearts. But they also showed stunning resilience. They marched, they testified, and they kept the memory alive, not for revenge, but to make sure the world never forgets what a single bomb can do. However, the world decided to quickly forget the terrors it saw in Japan. Chapter 5. Forgetting the Horror. When Japan surrendered, the world breathed a sigh of relief, but it didn't see what really happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that was no accident. The US quickly clamped down on footage, photos, and even survivor testimony. Reporters were blocked. Cameras were confiscated. The true scale of the horror was buried under words like necessary and victory. In fact, from 1945 until the early 1950s, hardly anyone outside Japan saw the real images: melted bodies, scorched babies, hospitals filled with human shadows. The US military filmed miles of footage, about 90,000 feet of film. capturing the devastation, but locked it away for decades. Japanese crews also shot their own footage, but most of it was seized. One film known as The Effect of the Atomic Bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was labeled top secret. Even Life magazine, when it finally published graphic photos in 1952, caused a global shockwave. Only years later, thanks to whistleblowers, journalists, and persistent survivors, did this buried truth start leaking out. The footage we see today, it's just a fraction, but it was enough to change the conversation. Enough to make the world realize that nuclear war isn't about strategy or politics. It's about what happens to skin, to families, to cities, when science forgets humanity. If dropping the atomic bombs ended the war and saved lives, does that justify turning 2 entire cities into graveyards? Or was it a war crime the world still refuses to admit? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Bye for now.